Mhm. Okay, you can go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Russell Hussain and inviting all of you to our special book talk organized by the Urban Research and Development Society. Uh, and today's book talk is on special justice, contested governance, and livelihood challenges in Bangladesh. The author is Dr. Lata, who is a senior lecturer in sociology at the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Melbourne. And our discussant today is Professor Regio, an associate professor, University of the Philippines, Dilman, and honorary research fellow at University of Melbourne. And before starting with our book talk and going to the author, I would like to discuss a bit more about URDS. Urban Research and Development Society started back its journey around 2007 and 8. From that time till today, URDS organized some international conferences, some national conferences, and organizing seminar on a regular basis. And also hosting different workshops related to urban sociology, urban planning, and urban regeneration and urban regeneration and displacement in the urban places. So, our the Urban Research and Development Society has been established by Professor Dr. Shahdat Hussain, who is a professor at the University of Dhaka in the Department of Sociology, and currently, Professor Shahadat Hussain is just completed his Juris Doctorate from UTS and PhD. He also completed his PhD from University of New South Wales, and he's currently working on law, justice, and society. And he was a former visiting fellow at Sydney University. And I would like to take the opportunity to introduce with the audiences about the author. Dr. Lutfunnahar Lata is a senior lecturer in sociology and social policy and the director of international and partnership in the School of Social and Political Science at the University of Melbourne. Lutfun's primary research area focuses on the sociology of work and employment, including the gig economy and the future of work. She has written about gig economy, urban marginality, migration, poverty, governance, housing and place-based advantage. She is a mixed method researcher with extensive experience in conducting and publishing qualitative, quantitative, and digital research and working with multidisciplinary teams that include stakeholders from academia, industry, and local and central governments. Lutfun is the author of Spatial Justice as the book we are going to talk today. Her research has been published in a number of high-ranking international journals such as the Sociological Review, Current Sociology, Sociology Compass, Gender, Work and Organizational Cities, Geographical Research, Housing Policy, Debate, Journal of Contemporary Asia, and Government Information Quarterly. We are very enthusiastic to learn something from Dr. Lutpunna Lata regarding her book. And I would like to take the opportunity to introduce also our discussion today. Dr. Redento is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Informal Urbanism, a research hub of the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning. Before joining the University of Melbourne in 2018, he had worked with academic institutions, development NGOs, government agencies, social movement, and private consulting groups in the Philippines. He has also conducted development training activities in different Asian countries like India, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam. Dr. Ratio's research interests include urban planning and governance issues such as formal economic activities, grassroots democracy, collective action, participatory planning, social inclusion policies. So, without making it delay, I would like to hand over our today's discussion to Dr. Lutpunna Lata, who will get 20 minutes to discuss about her book and enlighten us with his critical engagement. And so I'm inviting Dr. Lata. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Russell, and thank you, URGS, for organizing my talk today. So I would like to start with the acknowledgement of country. That's how we start usually any talk or any program in Australia. So I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the sovereign custodians of the land on which I live and work, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. So I'm going to talk about my book, Spatial Justice, Contested Governance and Livelihood Challenges in Bangladesh today. And as many of you know, this is part of my PhD project. So I did my PhD at the University of Queensland, and later, based on my PhD fieldwork and my thesis, I wrote this book. And so in this book, there are like 7 chapters, and I discuss the processes through which the urban poor's right to the city has been denied by the government and its agencies. This book also reveals how the urban poor are able to construct counter spaces, drawing on a range of everyday tactics and appropriating public space by quietly breaking the planned order of the city. So when I did my fieldwork, I kind of selected a particular slum, as you can see in this map, Tatala slum, and collected data from 94 informal workers and 37 key informants. And so based on that, then I wrote this book. And so this book makes I just want to briefly mention the contribution of the book first, and then I'll talk about the book in general. This book makes a significant contribution to the urban studies literature, providing rich account of the production of space and counter space by the urban poor. This book shows how the poor, using very little resources, defend themselves against the state's hegemonic production of space to produce a counter space, transgressing state-conducted conceived space by using a range of everyday strategies such as quiet appropriation of land, using a spatial mobility, and making informal, mutually beneficial pacts with a range of local state and non-state actors working outside those formal rules. As part of my empirical contribution, I presented my research findings on the livelihood challenges that Dhaka's urban poor experience while accessing public space. Presenting this case using a critical lens has enabled me to go beyond the production of the planned and conceived spaces of a city that has preoccupied much of the existing literature. Moreover, it has enabled me to provide a concrete account of the grassroots production of a counter space outside of the planned order of the city. The processes of the production and reproduction of counter spaces presented in this book have ramifications beyond the specific case of Dhaka or the South Asian urban context. While this case studies relies on specific urban experiences of one marginalized group and their production of a counter space, the process described in this book is relevant to other cities, where the hegemonic power of the state cannot be challenged through the usual channels of civil society or a free media. Where these conditions prevail, conceived spaces are produced to create homogeneous space, often forcefully erasing other narratives and ignoring marginalized groups' rise to the city. To explore how marginalized groups access public space, how they negotiate access, and what are the negotiation processes that allow them to produce a counter space, provide important clues about how this might be achieved in other cities with a similar socio-political environment. While there might be many other possible routes used by marginalized groups to claim their right to the city and produce counter spaces, this book provides a template for future investigations in other informal urban contexts. And so this book is based on my empirical study in Dhaka. And so this kind of, in a nutshell, the fieldwork I did. And Rehan is with us today. So Rehan was one of my research assistants who helped me when I was collecting data with 3 other Rehan's friends. So that was really helpful. And so I did interviews with 94 informal workers and 37 key informants, and interviews lasted between 30 to 90 minutes. And I also kind of took observation notes when I was doing my fieldwork. And so this is like the slum where I did my fieldwork and then kind of recruited participants from this slum. And with many of those participants, I actually walked various parts of the city while talking to them and kind of observing how they run their businesses. And so I'm going to briefly talk about the theories and concepts I used in this book. So one of the main theories that I used in this book is the theory developed by Henri Lefebvre, a French sociologist, philosopher. And so he kind of talked about how a space is produced. And he said that a space is produced in three ways. It's called like a triad. So he talked about conceived space, perceived space, and lived space. And so conceived space is something that the planners, the government actors, like it comes from a top-down approach. So how the city is designed from the top-down approach, how the city is designed by planners and other powerful actors. Whereas lived space is the space where we usually live through symbols and our kind of everyday life. And then perceived space is the space that we have kind of perception about different spaces. Like often we think slums are spaces for criminals, or it's like mostly like people who are very poor, they live in slum. And then while discussing about the production of the space, Lefebvre also mentioned like how general people have kind of agency and they could create a counter space. So the title of my book is like the production of counter space. I used Lefebvre's idea of counter space to showcase how the urban poor like could go beyond the planned order of the city, encroach land and create a new space. And Lefebvre also wrote about right to the city, and his idea was like everyone has a right to the city, everyone has a right to plan how cities space would be used. But that didn't really happen in real life, and so there are criticisms about that. But the main definition I used is kind of Parcells' idea of the right to the city, where he talked about that people can actually use this idea of right to the city because people can appropriate the space and people have a kind of a right to participation in planning how city space would be used. So I used that, and then I briefly used E.F. Tischel's idea of gray space and Onura's idea of urban informality. Both of them kind of discussed how the state could actually sometimes accept some people's illegal claim of a particular space, and then other times, and that's often kind of elites claims to appropriate the space are often legalized by the state, which after shall say it whitened, and then people like poor people, slum dwellers, their right to appropriate the space are often denied by the state, and so that's kind of blackened. And so Yatishal argued that in this way, a state often creates a gray space by kind of sometimes accepting people's encroachment and sometimes denying their encroachment. I also use the idea of everyday resistance and overt resistance strategies that's developed by Scott. And Scott kind of talked about that movement doesn't happen always like in a direct way. There are indirect ways. And so there's another famous author, Asif Bayat. He also talked about this quiet encroachment of the ordinary, the way everyday resistance strategies used by kind of marginalized groups to get by the city. So these are some of the ideas I used in this book. And so I'm going to talk briefly about my findings. So in the first findings chapter, I actually discussed how the state denied poor people's right to the city. And more or less, you are aware with how a state does that. So often slums are evicted. People are evicted from their both kind of living spaces as well as their livelihood spaces. And so this is one of the examples where one of my participants said, and then I mentioned previously that people have a right to participation in making decisions. But then in the political situation or like the way our political system works, you all are aware that politicians often go to people when they need vote. And so that actually reflected in this quote, where one of my participants said, like when I was asking whether they can go to the councillor or other politicians and talk about their problems. And so he said, to whom shall we go? The savior is the exploiter. The government advertises that they have done many things, but let them prove that. Some days ago, the city corporation election was held. The councillor promised us that they would give us many things. But where is he now? We don't get them near us now. But they went to every house before the election. they shook hands with us. They talked to us with a smiling face. They said that they would stand beside us. Now they don't stand beside us. And so this kind of shows the way politicians work. They go, but then once the vote is over, people don't really get that. And then it also shows like how they're not really accountable to poor people. So I spoke to one of the elected official of Dhaka North City Corporation. And so I asked them whether they consider these people as citizen of the city, whether they have a right to the city because they are often being evicted. And so he said, this is what he responded. He kind of said, yes, they are. Does that mean they act illegally? To grab land is illegal. It's not my job. It's the job of the central government to resettle them, to create jobs, to create facilities that will keep them in villages. My mandate is to keep the city clean, is to keep it livable. These are my mandates, and I'm very, very cordial to them. But cordiality does not help always. I have to weigh which is the best. So I have to do the best for citizens of Dhaka city. So it kind of shows like he doesn't really believe that these poor people, they have a right, they're citizens of the Dhaka city. And so, again, another ward councillor kind of said, and then this came like when I was talking about like these people, they appropriate the space, but they do it because they have no other alternatives for income earning. So they had to kind of rely on estates or like any public spaces to run their to earn their livelihoods. But then they keep saying this thing that this is not their space. They should not appropriate this space, and they should go back to our villages. And so same thing, kind of what councillor said, that, for example, where did I come from? Suppose I came from Barishal, but I appropriated a huge amount of property here. But it's not my property. It's the property of the government. I should not grab the government's property. I should go back to my village. And probably you are all aware that people move to Dhaka city every year. And the statistics show that almost 300,000 to 400,000 people every year migrate to Dhaka. So they do it in a large proportion of them come here because they want to find a job. There are not many jobs in their rural home. And so the government couldn't really create many jobs in rural areas. And that's one of the reasons they migrate to Dhaka. So this notion for a long time going on that they should go back to village, that's not really helpful for these people. And then also there is this notion that people who live in slums, they're kind of criminal, or people who run kind of vending businesses, they're criminal. So that came again where this elected official kind of said these people kind of create nuisance, so they cannot stay here. And then another police officer who kind of said that, I was talking to him about evictions by the local police station. And so he gave one example where he had to evicted these hawkers and vendors from Borani area because he got complaint from these people, from the neighbors, that there are issues. And so he kind of talked about that here, that why he had to evict them. And so that kind of again shows like how they are being labeled as criminals. And so what happens, but through this process, often the state kind of tolerates illegality, or like when they encroach space and run their businesses. And then at some point, the state decides like, no, they need to go. And so they're evicted. And through these processes, state created clear space. And how these people survive, they often had to pay a certain group of people. We call them mastans in Bangla. And so this is one example where one of my participants said how much they actually pay to different groups of people. So Sakib said, my brother pays 84 US dollar. And he kind of explained this at rent for a space for doing business in Bonani. And then he said like he pays 0.24 US dollar to a lineman for the police. As a lineman is someone that, who kind of collects money from every vendors in a particular area, and then he actually pay back. He actually give this money to another local mastan, and then the mastan kind of distributes this to local police station, local politicians, so it's a kind of bracket. And so they cannot really fight against these people. So they have created some kind of relationship with them, but still they feel bad. So this participant said that I feel really bad. I feel like someone is ripping my heart apart when I hand over $2 to the lineman. But there's nothing to do. We have to give this money. Otherwise, they will not allow us to sit here. If we protest, police will arrest us and file false charges against us. So they have really no other ways than pay this money to these people. So this is one strategy they use to appropriate the space and live in a space. But other than that, they also use everyday politics. For example, they often move from one space to another, so that they don't have to pay protection money, or they are not being affected by the police. And then they also quietly encroach land, and then, as I have already mentioned, they frequently change their livelihood spaces. And then they were also saying, like, sometimes the people, they are kind of also sympathetic to the people who collect money, because they have a kind of class feeling that that person coming from a probably lower socioeconomic background, so they might need this money. And so somehow all these feelings together, though they feel like they're being exploited, but they also feel like these people help them to run the business. Because they told me, like, often this lineman, the local police station, if they make a decision that they are going to evict vendors, they often tell this lineman, and this lineman then call the vendors so that they can move their stuff. So they are kind of helping them as well. But there are other ways, like one of the participants I spoke, he used to give his banana in front of a store, and the store shopkeeper kind of said, like, this is my man. That's how he kind of protected him. And there was another basket maker whom I met. He said he usually left all his baskets in a shop, his friend's shop, and then sell one basket or one or two baskets at a time in the pollution areas. So there are different strategies they use. But what I found that women kind of usually experience another kind of level of issues while selling stuff in public spaces. So women, because of like kind of social norm that women should not be doing business in public places, and then there's this idea that their husband, or male members of the family should take care of that. So they often experience some sort of social and cultural prejudice, and so also some people treat them like prostitutes. So this is one of my participants said how she experienced not very good behavior from people, because I thought she's a prostitute, but then she kind of told that she doesn't smile, and then people get to know, like, yeah, she's like a really vendor and she's not in that business. So kind of creating this image that you are a good human is really important in doing business in public spaces. The other female vendors that I spoke to often kind of are accompanied by their male members, either their husband or their sons or daughters when they do business. So not many women do business in public spaces, and there are various reasons for that, and I can talk about that later if you're interested. So that's pretty much my presentation. I'm gonna finish, but just before I finish, Shahzad, are you saying anything? Sorry. Okay, I'll finish in 2 minutes. No, I was like thinking like whether you're talking to me. So in terms of finishing my talk, so I did my research in Dhaka, and then I kind of wrote all this book and then other papers. So I kind of did my job. And then I wanted to do future research comparing the case of kind of Bangladesh and India, because I found especially I was looking at female vendors, there are not many female vendors here. So I was kind of more interested, like, what happens whether it's because of religion whether the scenario is different in India. So if anyone is interested in doing future research, they could take a gender approach and they could do a kind of a comparative study between India and Bangladesh. The other areas people could probably do research is like, I did not speak to Mastans, but Mastans have definitely their own logics, why they do it, how they do it. So it would be interesting to kind of do a study how Mastans operate these lineman practices and how they collect money and how they create relationships with police. So that could be an interesting study as well. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions after Vedant's talk. Do you guys want me to stop sharing my slides?
Yeah, please, you can do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lutpurna Lata. Your discussions had enlightened us a lot of bit about your research and the future research directions regarding Dhaka city, so as like other kinds of other cities that are much more relevant in the context of special justice contested governments and livelihood challenges. Now, I would like to invite Professor Rerinto, Associate Professor, University of the Philippines, Dilman, and honorary research fellow, University of Melbourne, to shed light on the book as a discussant in this book talk. Professor Redden, if you
Yeah. Thanks, Russell, and of course, Lata, for that quite encompassing presentation. It's always good to be reminded of the key arguments in the book. Lata and I did our PhD about the same time at the University of Queensland on almost similar topic, the spatial politics of street vending, while she was working on, street vending in Dhaka. I was working on the spatial politics of street vending here in Metro Manila, and we would always compare notes and sometimes debate about how we frame empirical insights and how we interpret certain conceptual constructs. And I intend to continue that kind of, in a way, intellectual engagement about certain conceptual provocations, but also very relevant empirical insights. So I prepared some slides to keep the discussion going and to, in a way, provoke some of Lata's really important contributions to urban studies. So let me just share my screen. Can you see it now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm not going to be presenting or touching on the highlights of the 7 chapters of the book, but what I decided to do is to engage with probably the single most important construct, but also empirical grounding of Lata's book, which is the notion of counter space. And around this notion and empirical grounding, I would be sharing some of my insights, but also throwing some questions, not just for Lata, but for everyone to reflect on, as we are probably all aware of the complexities of urban informality, the politics behind, the governance processes that underpin but also constrain some of the agentic practices of street vendors in many parts of the world, but in this case, in some sections of Dhaka. The pictures you're going to show in the slides are pictures I took about 6 years ago when I visited Dhaka to also do research with Kim Dovey and Tansel Shafiq in 2019 before pandemic hit. So you would probably, these pictures are probably looking familiar to most of you. Okay, so who's counter space is my main question, which of course Lata already started addressing in her presentation, but let me just continue the conversation. And first emphasize some of the strengths of the book. One is it really offers important empirical evidence that seeks to connect the multiple but also broad issues around questions of resilience, urban resilience, power, spatial justice, informality, and poverty in general. I thought there are really rich ethnographic accounts of the living and working conditions of informal workers, particularly zooming in on the conditions of shatola street vendors in one informal settlement in Dhaka. And for me, one of the key strands of the book is really it's focused on the gender dimensions of informal work in Dhaka. And this is one of the key dimension I never touched on in my own work. And I've been trying to catch up on this element, but Lata has intelligently engaged with the question of gender and wide-ranging implications of gendered implications of such framing. In the process, Lata also has interrogated the complex, multi-layered power relations in street vending. You know, looking at the intermediaries, the role of mastans, the role of local officials, but also of local leaders of informal organizations. And these insights offer us a glimpse into the realities of street vending, the politics of street vending in Satula in particular, but broadly about the dynamics of urban informality in Dhaka in general. And some of these arguments also resonate with the broader urban conditions in many parts of Southeast, South Asia, but also some cities in Latin America and African continent. So, yeah. Now, having said that, I framed some of the insights based on how I look at the notion of counter space. One, as an important conceptual framing in looking at the contested space, the precarious livelihood, and then, of course, the practices and processes of governance. As a counter space, the book, of course, is trying or tried to frame the question of spatial justice, contested governance, and livelihood challenges as part of the encompassing notion of counter space. And here, Lata has intelligently framed counter space as really a socio-spatial response by marginalized groups to a very exclusionary urban governance and hegemonic spatial practices. We all know that, you know, the notion of counter space is rooted in Andre Lefebvre's notion of spatial production. And in the case of Shatola slum street vending practices, counter spaces emerge as informal practices in contested areas that challenge the state's conceived spaces. So remember the tripartite or the tri notion of Lefebvre's perceived, conceived, and lived spaces. But in this case, counter space is in a way a counterpoint to the state's prioritization of elite interests and commoditized urban space. Lata also in the presentation touched on how informality, the right to the city, gray space, and differentiated citizenship are all folded in as part of the counter space. In the process, the question is, if these are all parts of counter space, how do we now frame or conceptualize resistance? Because it seems like all forms of practices, all forms of agencies, both collectively and individually, become part of what in the book is called covert resistance. But you know, in some literatures, there is a very nuanced framing between resistance, resilience, and reworking. And in my reading, some of the practices engaged in the book probably constitute resilience, not totally resistance. Some of them might constitute what syndicates calls reworking. So I think it's important to distinguish these three notions of reworking, resilience, and resistance in order to unpack the very rich, but also somehow a black box conceptual black box of counter space. So for instance, reworking refers to practices that alter the conditions to generate more workable lives. So not everything that we do constitutes resistance. I think that's the major point in this slide. And it's very important to nuance the practices of the urban poor in particular, especially the gendered practices of the urban poor, in order for us to properly and nuancedly recognize or attribute certain praxis, but also articulation of their everyday living and working conditions. So for instance, I think some of the shatola street vendors resort to reworking, so they don't totally contribute to political uh, political or radical political transformation of their condition, but they rework. They try to make certain conditions more workable and more habitable in order to survive in their everyday uh, engagement with the authorities. The second notion is, of course, the notion of resilience, which pertains, according to syndicates, to pragmatic acts that enable people to survive amid difficult circumstances, which is something closer to reworking. Again, they resort to improvisations in order to survive and deal with the difficult circumstances. And these two are quite different, at least from syndicates' framing, from resistance, because resistance has more political and radical dimensions to it. Resistance here refers to actions that draw on, but also produce critical consciousness to confront and redress conditions of oppression and exploitation at various scales. So the question for us, urban scholars, informality scholars, and of course for Lata is, in framing counter space, how do we distinguish practices of reworking, resilience, and resistance that are probably embedded in counter space practices, but empirically, do we have insights that particularly attend to this nuancing and framing on the ground? So that's one. In my own work, when it comes to dealing with state institutions, state officials, I draw on the works of critical power authors on the importance of looking at the entanglements of power. Because when we try to analyze and articulate the entanglements, the complexities of connections with the powerful, that's also the time we, in a way, try to understand and probably articulate the power of entanglements. So my question here is, Lata, have you encountered any vernacular concepts or terms that you have probably deployed in other research or other work that has also enriched our understanding of counter space based on the reworking, the resistance, and the resilience divide or interplay of those two in relation to the relationship, the uneasy relationship between state institutions and grassroots organizations? And then, of course, aside from the reworking, resilience, and resistance paradigm, we also have, building on the work of Diserto, the importance of identifying which practices are considered strategic or can be considered to constitute strategic agency, and which ones might fall under what we might call tactical agency. Again, there is a difference between the two, and strategic agency normally constitutes a mastery of the larger picture, meaning you get to engage with state institutions, with grassroots players, with the more strategic horizon in mind, with probably a more long-term political program or direction in mind, while tactical agency primarily refers to the everyday maneuvering of events and trying to turn the opportunities or crisis into something that we can work on, something that we could probably capitalize in order to advance certain agenda. So again, based on probably empirical and now I think years after you wrote the book, do you think we can further nuance the notion of counter space processes based on this notion of Diserto? And again, because you have looked intensively into the gender dynamics, is there a difference between the agency of men and women? Can we frame them with the strategic and tactical agency framework in mind? And if we can, would there be any difference in terms of framing the practices of male and female vendors in Dhaka? So that's, I think, the third. And then, again, this is very important. Aside from counter space as conceptual framing, I think another great contribution of the framing of counter space, it can be considered a pragmatic response, particularly by marginalized groups. And in the book, Lata was articulating the importance of the different tactics and strategies, such as the quiet encroachment, spatial mobility, spatial or informal negotiations that really allow these vendors to survive and resist the exclusionary urban arrangements in a particular site. But again, the question is, what are the gender dimensions of such socio-spatial strategies and tactics? I think you alluded a bit, but you could probably expound on the difference in terms of the gendered strategic responses as an element of counter space, because as a pragmatic response, yes, it's there, and but can we realistically make a distinction between gendered oriented agency or tactics of street vendors? I think that's another thing that would be important to nuance from the very rich empirical discussion of the working and living conditions. And I think this is my final point. As an extension, of course, counter space has a lot of political and pragmatic dimensions. But as scholars, the other element is our ethical accountability, our ethical responsibility to the research participants or to the marginalized groups we work alongside. So as engaged scholars, and I know Lata has been an engaged scholar for a long time in Melbourne, you work with the gig economy workers, but going back to grassroots organizations in Dhaka, how do you think might we assist vendors in building up or enhancing their capacity to sustain opportunities or processes of counter space and strengthen their political power for them to better engage with state institutions? Because you also mentioned in the book that it's very difficult for them to, in a way, develop a more strategic political agenda. But I know that the political situation in Dhaka or in Bangladesh, for that matter, has changed. So given the socio-political context now, is there an important role that engaged scholars can play in order to help the street vendors, in a way, gain more political power and better engage state institutions? And I think this is my final questions. Going back to your journey as a PhD scholar or now as an academic at the University of Melbourne, but looking back, what I call polyethical dilemmas or issues did you face in chronicling, or some anthropologists would call it extracting counter space practices and grassroots knowledge of street vendors. Did you face any ethical dilemma? How did you handle it? What navigational practices did you resort to in order to resolve some of those dilemmas you face, in case you had some of them? And this is my final slide. This is for everyone, because I think one of the important things I learned from engaging with the book is, again, sustaining our ethical scholarly accountability with the marginalized groups in particular that we work with. The book has taught us a lot of issues that we may face going into the field, interviewing, and trying to understand their political calculations. But I would be probably leaving these questions for everyone for the open discussion later on. How do we have a role in generating spaces or helping street vendors produce insurgent practices, as Lata mentioned in probably the concluding section of the book, to advance spatial justice? And how do we imagine what is a spatially just public, communal, or private space in a context of entrenched poverty, inequality, and informality? Do we have a role to imagine it alongside the marginalized urban poors that we've been working with as engaged scholars? So I'll stop there, and I look forward to having a sustained conversation later during the open forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Radin. It was very engaging and quite enriching discussions, and because of the questions that you raised, the book was published back in 2023, and now in 2025, you opened up, came out with some questions that is actually we need to explore and investigate a bit more. And I believe Lata, as she's working continuously on the same field and very extensively, and she had a very engaging and enriching documents and literature and field experience regarding these issues, so she can also explain a bit more in terms of your questions. So Lata, I'm getting back to you.
Yeah, so I was going to ask Russell whether you want to respond me first. Okay, so thank you very much, Redden. Those are very important questions. So I think I would be brief because so that other people can ask questions. But about your first question about, I think, Carter's ideas of like this resilience, reworking, and resistance. So I think the main difference between Scott and Cass is Cass kind of criticize Scott's idea that he didn't really talk about agency, like direct agency of people, like whether it's intentional or not intentional, the resistance. And so, but in terms of like resistance, I find Scott's ideas were still useful because he kind of classified two types of resistance. So the everyday resistance, which kind of Cass divided them as resilience and reworking, and to other scholars, it kind of seems kind of similar. So you can think like they're doing reworking, but you can also interpret it as resilience. So I don't really find much differences between these two terminologies, resilience and reworking. So I use Scott's, and I know like you use probably Cass in your work. So I was more kind of biased to Scott, so that's why I used his idea, but I'm aware about Cass's ideas as well. And then other questions about Sartre's strategic and tactical agency. So I would say mostly for vendors, in line with like this everyday resistance, they were probably more tactical. They use tactical agency rather than strategic agency, so they don't really have that much power to influence national level policy, or like they were not really very organized, as I mentioned in my book. And so also for women, you asked like about the gender dimensions, gender-oriented texts. So I haven't spoken about this, but female vendors are often older women or like single women. And so they were often very vulnerable populations, and they use this vulnerability not to pay this protection money to merchants. So merchants were, in general, was kind of nice to them because they knew like a female vendor or like a female will not work in a public space unless she is very vulnerable. So they get that benefits, and so they were not really resisting like male vendors. So they were pretty much kind of had a better opportunity to use the space. Even police would be kind to them. So that's the kind of gender idea, very much gendered dimension. In terms of like our own responsibility, whether we have any responsibilities or ethically how I felt. So what I did, like we can't really engage with them all the time because these vendors, they don't really always connect with us, or they leave Dhaka sometimes. But at least one of them contacted me once when they were like having a issue. They had that their slum might be evicted. So the thing I did is like I told them about the legal services, the NGOs that could provide them free services to get legal aid so that they can fight in the court. And so there were like other examples before, like the Coral slum dwellers. They also blocked the road, and the prime minister had to talk and say, yes, we want to kind of evict people from the Coral slum. So I talked about the strategies, but obviously, kind of that's what I could have done. I couldn't really go with them and participate in their resistance practices. But I felt, yeah, I always feel like we probably have more responsibilities to make them more strong, or like to teach them how to build their strong organization so that they can use that. But I feel like the slum dwellers in Dhaka now are more politically conscious. So we know about Chatterjee's political society, right? So the people in India, they were somehow always more politically powerful because they had this trend historically that they always kind of fight if anything happens, if they feel anything is unjust. Whereas in Bangladesh, people are too much kind of oppressed by the police, by the military, and so they had probably less kind of intention to fight back against the state. But still, people know now about their voting rights. And previously, slum dwellers didn't have any voting rights, so they did not have that much political power. But now I feel like they could use that political power to negotiate with local leaders. Did I miss anything? You had many questions, so if I didn't answer anything, ask me again. Sorry.
Just one question, probably. What particular ethical dilemmas did you face while working on the research, while doing the field work, and even after?
I think while doing the field work, I didn't really face any ethical dilemmas. I felt bad, but I knew about the working conditions. I did like field work before, like when I was doing my undergraduate my honors project. I went to slum as well. So I knew about that, but then I felt helpless in a sense, like I felt this problem with vendors that they are not really organized. Like, from your case study in Manila, vendors have their own organizations, they can fight back. Whereas in Bangladesh, they're like not really strong. Any like even now gig workers organizations, I feel like they're doing far more better than vendors. So vendors had almost no organizations when I spoke to them, and I feel like that's a challenge, that they don't really have any leader who can speak, who can negotiate with police or masters. So, and then it's not like I felt like then I can't do anything. Like if people are not interested, I'm like an outsider, right? the can't really do much for them. So that's just something very kind of frustrating, I would say, from my point of view.
Yeah, so I think Professor Redden, all the raised questions has been answered, and some questions he raised for all of us regarding do we have a role regarding the counter space in Dhaka city and in some other informal settlements. Now, I would like to open the floor for everyone who have questions and comments. Please, you may participate in asking questions to either to the discussant or to the author.
Well, so I don't have too much questions to the author or to the discussants. I would definitely appreciate their endeavor to debunk the counter space and shedding lights regarding South Asia or post-colonial cities. And I was personally engaged with this project, so I have seen how the author uh, gradually developed this project and what was the outcome of this project. I'm really curious to understand that the author initiated this project in 2015 during a time when there is a strong presence of authoritarian regime. So uh, in her analysis, we we came to know about like resistance, much more about human agency rather than governance. Also, the in her book, the author tried to mention too much about the governance and how governance is restricting urban poor, especially street vendors' rights. But it's much more about human agency and less about resistance. Uh, but I'm really curious to know about the nature of the state because I think I found that it is important to analyze the state as a theoretical juncture because as you know that post-colonial state uh, it is really different in configurations, and so whatever the outcome, the policies, the human agencies is completely it is embedded with the colonial legacies. So how my inquiry is whether the author has like any kind of future endeavor or the author is planning to do that to understand the state using the decolonial lens and how it uh, creates or construct like counter space. So that is one of the questions that I would like to understand or know. And I, I have some other insights, or I would say some of the comments about the book. Like one thing that I do not understand about uh, like the author mentioned about the gender dimensions, which is really great, and also the author tried to uh, like shed lights on the gray spaces, which is a construct co-creations by the state. Uh, and also the author says that she is biased about theoretical like contribution she used by vehemently throughout the book. But do you find that constructive resistance, which was coined by Sorensen and Stellan Wintagen, is helpful to rewrite this book in future? And also, my third and final question is like, what could be the outcome after the like post uprising situations? Uh, if you have any plan to do another project regarding that how post uprising situations shed lights to the urban poor, especially their like that their political agencies during this juncture. Thank you so much, Lutfunar Lata and the discussion for your wonderful engagement.
Thank you, Shamsu. Great question. So I would say, okay, you Your first question was about, God, I was like, I should have written that. So your first question was, what was your
Because
first question
yeah,
then?
so
Sorry.
my first question was, I think, is there any scope of using decolonial lens
Okay,
uh,
yeah.
in
That's it.
analyzing this project? Yeah.
Okay, now I remember. Yeah. Okay, so about your first question. So that's what I mentioned. Like in India, people can always resist. Whereas in Bangladesh, we don't resist. And that has like historical narratives are important. That's why. So I don't think in our country we have changed, like the state's mindset has not really changed that much since colonization. We are still very repressive, so state's policies you would always see it's not very participatory. Like they don't have a question about that, like power and participation. So I wrote about that in the book, like how participation can be very like minimal participation, consultative kind, or no participation at all, or like very pseudo kind of participation. You are talking to people, but you are not really acting, not taking their suggestions. So in our country, you don't see really state does consultation at a kind of a grassroots level. So we don't really have that kind of, like Philippines is a great example. At least they had this kind of participatory governance. We don't have almost at all participatory governance. So it's very much top down. And so then the state could do whatever they like. That's why I showed some of the quotes from ward councillors and then DNCC mayor, because those were like those were their kind of perspectives. Those were the how the discourse is established, that these people, poor people, are kind of nuisance. Poor people are creating the city dirty. They should go back to their village. So if the kind of ground narrative is like that, it's very hard for poor people to try engage or resist with this state. So that's a real challenge. And then the second question is about like what could we expect post July movement. So I think I was kind of very hopeful, like all of you, that something would change. But as we all know, like we don't see any changes. But at least something you have to appreciate that people could talk. Like rickshaw pullers the rickshaw pullers gathered near Shahbag and kind of raised their voice, right? Everyone can at least express their voice, which was kind of unthinkable during the last regime. So I would say at least people could do that, and you can then see the diversity, the variation in people's perspectives now, which is at least a good step in democratic practices. We just have to see what happens next. And in terms of project, I was interested in doing a project about post July people's engagement in July, but the Australian funding is very problematic. It's very much tied to kind of Australian ideas on like how it could benefit Australia. So I don't think I'll get any funding if I try. So I haven't tried anything, but let's see. I might try other funding in the future and try to do some projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamsul Arifin Rehan and Lutfun Lata. Is there anyone else who want to ask some questions? Professor Dr. Shahadat Hussain.
Thank you. Very excellent presentation by both author and discussion. And I'll make some quick comments about the book. I found this book very interesting in terms of theoretical contribution and its empirical evidences, very sound. And it starts with connection between poverty, space, and spatial justice. And theoretical foundation is very strong, particularly Lefebvre, Harvey, Scott, Bayat. All of the theory is very good, and definitely it's very useful theoretical framework. But at the same time, I would suggest to look at the Wakant work in the future any project, because Wakant work is very also useful, because he is the co-author of Pierre Bourdieu, and Burdu and Wakam, that could be also useful for urban studies in future. If Lata can do some further research, that will be also useful. And some young urban scholar can also focus on ethnographic studies like James Houlston, who have done some insurgent citizenship in the context of Brazil. This is the, but already this is the PhD work, you understand, and the book is published on basis of PhD thesis, and definitely is very sound, particularly using Livelihood and Harvey useful framework. And so after 3, 4, and 5, particularly 4 and 5, is very 3 also started the discussion, particularly power, governance, and resistance. And chapter 4 and 5 has expanded these things, particularly eviction by the state. And that is already Lata mentioned, criminalization of poverty. That is the thesis of Wakan, and that could be extended and further research, how poor are being criminalized. And definitely another thing could be highlighted, that is nexus between state and market. Yes, definitely has made this here state, NGOs, and also their own resistance. And counter space already our discussion has discussed about counter space, and he has made useful comments. And definitely gender space is very important, definitely, but it could be also a separate study as well, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a, right, you understand my point. But I found this work is very useful in terms of theory and empirical evidence, and future researcher can get guidance from here. And particularly now I'm doing some research on criminalization of poverty, human-led cities, and also some extension from social legal perspective, criminology perspectives, and I can get some useful guidance from this work, and that will be definitely very useful for urban studies in Bangladesh. And just we started the urban studies journey in Bangladesh in 1990, because before 1990 there is no sociological study on urban studies, in fact, right? And before 1990, then while I was undergraduate student, then I decided to move some urban studies, because everyone used to study on rural poverty. And last 20 years, 30 years, a number of works have been done, particularly Lata's work is very useful. Future research can be done based on this research, just to understand. That is my comment. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And yeah, I kind of talked about Holston a bit in my book, Insurgent Citizenship. Yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Shahadat Hussain. If anybody from the audience have any other questions, you can please raise your hand and ask questions.
Abrar has a question.
Yeah, Abrar, please go on.
Hello, everyone. Good evening to you all. I have a question for Lata ma'am. You worked with racketeering and protection money. So do you have any advice to people who want to do research related to these things? Firstly, how do we earn the trust of the vendors? As there's a silent culture of silence when it comes to racketeering and street vending. No one wants to talk for out of concern for their safety. And that's the first part, how to earn the trust of the people we want to learn from. And secondly, how do we maintain our own safety? Are there any steps to maintain our safety or the people who are helping us in our work? That's all.
Thank you, Abra. So I actually wrote a methodology paper about negotiating kind of trust with different stakeholders. So what you have to do is like you have to hang out with them for a long time to have their trust, earn their trust, kind of. So initially, Rehan knows like we used to go to the slum almost every day, and then I spoke to people informally, and then later I started doing formal interviews. And even when I did interviews, I didn't ask them initially about the protection money. So that was actually the last question, the last part of my interviews when I asked them whether they had to pay any mustangs and we kind of, I also told them like they, whatever they say, that would be kind of confidential. I'm not going to write their names, so you have to tell them all those things like anonymity, that they would be anonymous. You will do no harm, all those things. So that's how you build trust. And then masters or linemen, they usually have time. Like there's a particular time in the day, like in the afternoon, evening. So they come to collect money. So if vendors trust you, vendors would actually tell you when they come. Like I saw a lineman, I was waiting in front of a chotpoti ala, like for 3 hours, like I was talking, taking names. He was doing his work, and then he said, "You can stay up and see how they collect money." And I actually sat there almost for 3 hours to see like when the lineman comes and take money. So like if they trust you, they'll tell you. So this building trust is your first job. So and it's possible. People in Bangladesh like to talk. Poor people are very generous. So I would say you have to just go try talk to them informally for first few days, and then you can ask them whether you could do an interview with them.
And
Thank you,
also, I would
ma'am.
like to add with Lata that I think that after the revolution, after the mass appraisal, I mean, people are more eager to expose what's going on. Uh, so I think it would be more easier to conduct study with these kind of sensitive issues if you really want to do that. So yeah, just you need to rapport and build up that relationship one by one.
I agree
Thank you.
with Lutfullah Lotta and Shamsul Arifin, but the reality right now in today's market after the July uprising, people are much more afraid because so many multifunctional political groups are actually trying to take control over the market. So they are much more afraid rather than before. So it gives different dimensions and it brings different dilemma if when we go for visiting or talking about different kinds of things because they are sometimes they are unsure who are they the linesman and sometimes now the police is foolish political like police as a police linemen's it's stopped but so many groups actually are there so that makes it more puzzle and that makes it more challenging to collect data regarding the from the street vendors and from informal sources so now, as you also asked about the after the July uprising, what's gonna be happen next, and so Lutfullah Lata was hopeful that situation will be changes as using their voting power, they can negotiate with the political authorities. But again, I'm afraid that the reality is totally different. They really do not have any negotiating power with these political parties because now previously they want that was a one-dimensional force, but now multi-dimensional forces is making them more and more vulnerable in the new context. So I really don't know what comment I should make, but these are my observation for the last couple of months that makes me more worried about the informal workers and the encroachment of the public places in different area of the Dhaka city. Yeah. So anybody else, if you have any other questions, please. Okay. If you have no any other questions, then I would like to provide the floor to Dr. Shahadat Hossain for his final remarks. He's the founder of the Urban Research and Development Society, and I would like to extend my thanks to him for organizing this program. And now, please, Dr. Shadat Hussain.
Yes, I have already made some comments, but just I want to say something about our future activities based on this discussion and what we can do. We can develop some further urban development projects so that our young international scholar can be useful, can get useful guidance from our work. And we need collaboration. Definitely, you are the people who are the right people who are working this field. And any sort of advice, any sort of suggestion um, I will give you. Now, no more. This is not my platform. It is your platform. You will develop this platform, and you will always get my guidance. Right? You who are working this field, um, who are working in Bangladesh, working overseas, you can make future collaboration, doing further research in the context of Dhaka, in particular, and other cities as well. Right? And because other cities also become important because of climate change, other southern, coastal cities are also important. City of Chittagong are also important, and other big cities are also important. Therefore, we need more urban studies, and definitely future of sociology lies in the field of urban studies. That is my understanding. However, first of all, I would like to thank author who has given us time, and we all are very beneficial from this from her presentation. And obviously, we would like to thank Discussion, who has experiences in the context of Metro Manila, almost similar context of Dhaka, and he has given his thoughts on Lata's work that will be also useful for understanding the context and discussions. But Arifin, Russell, who have made this comment, and also participants. Thank you all for participating in this program. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So have a good night, and thank you for joining with us, and stay connected with us. We are going to organize some more events in the upcoming days on different issues related to urban sociology, and crisis of sociology in the context of Southeast Asia, and overall other cities that we need to be that are making us more and more thought-provoking day by day, and we need to address them for the sake of the sociology. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you.